So this is the new GoPro Hero 13 Black, and this year's new GoPro isn't about adding more resolution, it isn't about better stabilization, and it isn't about a new processor. Those are actually the same as the Hero 12. What the Hero 13 is all about though is making it a lot easier to use, but not only that, much easier to get pro level footage with a ton of new accessories like new ND filters that get that nice motion blur, a new macro lens to capture close-up shots, a new ultra-wide lens, as well as a new anamorphic lens. Now, even though they didn't upgrade the processor, they did actually add some new shooting modes where you can now record in HLG HDR, but along with that, they've also added some new slow-mo burst modes where you can get 120 frames per second in 5.3K, 300 frames per second in 900p, and a crazy 400 frames per second in 720p. Now, before we get into the details of what the Hero 13 is all about, I kind of wanted to mention that this GoPro video may be a little bit different than some of the others that you may see out there. So I'm not a professional action sports athlete, and I'm not even a professional videographer or anything like that, but there are of course some great videos probably from some of those folks that you can check out once you're done over here. My perspective is more as a content creator that makes a lot of sports tech reviews, so I'm always looking for something that can not only get great footage, but it's also just easy to use. I want to definitely get as good a quality as footage as I can, but I also need to be efficient about filming, just considering how much content I need to pump out. GoPros are definitely one of the most convenient options where I can just grab one, but there also can be some frustrations with using them, like quickly switching them from mount to mount, especially if the thumb screws are cranked down really tight. And then for my channel specifically, I need close-up shots for the kinds of products that I cover. And with the Hero 13, it comes with some features that I'm certainly stoked about considering my needs. There's a new magnetic mounting system where I can just quickly swap it from mount to mount. There's a new macro lens where I'm able to get close-up shots, and there's a ton of new other lens options, including ND filters. There's longer battery life, and they're finally bringing back GPS, which was removed from the Hero 12. All right, so starting out with the hardware. So the great news is that they're keeping the same overall form factor from most recent generations. So most, if not all, accessories that fit a Hero 9, Hero 10, 11, or 12 should fit. Like here's a dive cage for the 9, 10, 11, and 12, and it fits perfectly fine with the Hero 13. In fact, that's actually what I used down in Spain recently to do some diving with the Hero 13. The big upgrade though on the case is actually at the bottom where we still have the foldable fingers, and then we've also got the 1/4-20 tripod hole down there that we saw on the Hero 12. However, now there's these little slots on the side which are meant for the new magnetic mount, which makes it just really easy to switch it from mount to mount without having to futz around with a thumb screw. Now, GoPro of course wasn't the first company to come out with this sort of idea, but they do have some nice touches with how they implemented it. So first off, it's incredibly secure where I can really wrench on this thing and it's on there. And it's not just a magnet, there's actually 2 latches on each side that actually click and lock into place, and you can use it in either direction. Like you can just flip it around, which can come in super handy depending on your situation. They do still recommend using the traditional mount with the thumb screw for what I think they called high vibration activities, like let's say on the outside of a car or an airplane or something like that. But even though they're saying that it's not meant for all activities, it's been totally secure for me with everything that I've done with it at least. And one more thing that I noticed is that even if you accidentally unlatch one side, it actually still stays attached. So for me, I'll definitely be getting a ton of these new magnetic mounts just so I can have one like attached to my shorty, and then I can have additional ones attached to my bike and whatever else, and just be able to quickly snap the camera on and off. There's just been many times that I've wanted to quickly move my GoPro from one mount to the other to only discover that the thumb screw was so tight that I couldn't budge it without a wrench. So this is going to come in really handy. And the only downside that I can really see with these is that they are $25 a pop for additional mounts, and it is not as low profile as the built-in like little fingers. But they also have this new magnetic ball joint mount that interfaces with the buckle clip, and this provides a more flexibility by having a ball joint mount to position the camera in more angles than just the one angle of the traditional GoPro mount. Anyhow, now with the ability to use the thumb screw, a 1/4-20 tripod mount, or the new magnetic mount, it's just a lot more flexible now in terms of how I can actually mount my GoPro, and quite frankly, how quickly I can actually swap it. Another upgrade with the Hero 13 is that it also has a new battery, which they say has 10% more capacity than the previous generation Enduro, where it has a 19 milliamp hour capacity versus 720 from before. Now, a bigger battery is great and all, but that's nothing without better heat management, and they've addressed this in a couple ways where the 13 Black is supposed to be more power efficient. But not only that, you'll notice this new grill up front along with a huge heat sink inside that's supposed to help with heat management. Now, I actually haven't had this long enough to do some extended length recording tests, but definitely look for some follow-up tests for that in the future. Now, unfortunately, the battery does have a different shape to it with the connectors, so batteries are not going to be forwards or backwards compatible, so that is kind of a bummer for those of us who've accumulated a lot of GoPro batteries, but guessing that they'll probably keep this new battery standard moving forward, at least with quite a few generations. And then speaking of power, they also have this new Contacto power accessory, so this allows you to power your GoPro, I guess theoretically forever, via USB-C. And it consists of a replacement door with magnetic contact points on the outside that then supply power via USB-C on the inside, all while keeping the camera completely sealed off from the elements. And then it just powers your GoPro via this magnetic cable with USB-C on the other end, so you could just plug it into a battery pack or even plug it into a wall adapter. And they say that this whole Contacto setup is waterproof down to 33 feet or 10 meters, where it has an IX7 water resistance rating with the cable attached. And this works with or without the battery installed, since it is powering it via the USB-C connection inside the case. So now let's talk about more of the creative aspects of the Hero 13, and they're rolling out what they're calling their new HB series line of lenses, including a macro lens, ND filters, an ultra wide angle lens, as well as an anamorphic lens. Now again, I like the easy button just like everyone else, but I also do like to get as good a footage as possible, as long as I really don't have to mess around with things all that much. And what's nice about these new lenses is that they all have an auto detect mode where the camera just knows which lens is on there, and it automatically applies the settings appropriate for that lens. So if we just go ahead and pop a lens on there, it just knows which lens it is, and it even displays it right up top. Oh, and all these new lenses are hyper smooth compatible. They're all water resistant, although it's a little bit different rating depending on which lens that you're using. They're all scratch resistant, and they also all have a hydrophobic coating so water wicks away. All right, so with the ND filter, so these come in a 4-pack where they have an ND4, an ND8, an ND16, as well as an ND32, depending on how much light that you have and how much motion blur that you want. Now, using ND filters in general can kind of be a guessing game sometimes when it comes to which one's appropriate for the particular light conditions, but they've actually thought of that where it not only auto detects the lens, but it also adjusts the settings automatically. And not only that, it can actually recommend a different strength ND if the one that you have attached isn't appropriate for the scene. Again, for someone like me who just needs something to tell me what to use and not have to mess around with anything that much, that's seriously pretty good. So on all the shots in this video, these were just mounting the lens on there and just letting the Hero 13 do its thing. And in general, it produces some pretty amazing shots. So with this shot right here, I would say that it was maybe a little bit too blurry, at least with some of the background elements where you can see that's a little bit shaky off in the distance, but you can actually adjust the amount of motion blur by just going into the Pro Tune settings, as well as just manually adjusting shutter speed and exposure. I mean, if you have more time than what I have, but I think it is pretty great out of the box. And then the ultra wide lens is also kind of interesting, where this can provide up to a 177-degree view, along with their new ultra super view setting where it can stretch a 4:3 aspect ratio to 16:9. And they also have an ultra hyper view setting where you can stretch their 8:7 format into 16:9. The thing that I actually particularly like about this lens though is their new 1:1 aspect ratio, where this allows me to have a ton of flexibility in post, where I could actually use footage in horizontal or vertical format depending on what platform I want to publish to. Now, this lens does have the limitation though of 4K 60, and you can only go as slow as 1080p 120, so you can't use all the modes that the 13 has to offer with this lens mounted. Now, one big reason I haven't used GoPros in a lot of my reviews is because of its macro capabilities, or at least kind of lack thereof, but they have a new macro lens mod where you can get as close to 4 inches to your subject, which is 4 times closer than the standard lens. And the kind of shots that you can get with this are seriously pretty darn cool, and what I like about this is that it still has a wide field of view, so I can not only capture the product up close, but also the surroundings to kind of give some context. Now, this is the one lens that does require a little bit of work to get the right shot, where it has a focus ring on the outside where you can get the proper focus on the subject or the product. Now, seeing if something is actually in focus though is kind of tough with a small screen, of course, but they do have some on-screen peaking options to show you what's in focus and what's not. So they do have these different colors for the on-screen peaking depending on the subject that you're trying to get in focus, but I actually do find these a little hard to distinguish sometimes, so I'd really like to see these highlights be a bit thicker or just a bit more obvious on the screen. Another thing is that there's no indicator on the focus ring to show you where you're at in the focus range, so you don't really have a gauge on if you're currently focused far away or as close as possible, but you can probably just solve this by putting a little bit of paint on there or something like that. What I did find kind of nice though is that even if I didn't focus quite right, like if I accidentally focused on the landscape instead of the main focal point, the subject that's up close is actually still pretty clear. I mean, definitely not as crisp as if I actually did get the focus right, but it was still pretty usable. And another thing that you may notice is that it does allow you to get a bit of bokeh from the background if you have the focus correct. And then they also have a new anamorphic lens mod that's coming out where you can get both 21:9 as well as 16:9 aspect ratios for that cinematic look. And those aren't going to be available quite yet when the Hero 13 becomes available on September 10th, but should be available a little bit later on down the road. Now, when it comes to backwards compatibility with these new lenses, unfortunately, these new HB series lenses won't work with previous generation GoPros. And that's not just about the auto detection. There's actually a little notch on these new lenses that makes it only compatible with the Hero 13 and then any cameras that they make in the future that have the same compatibility. But in terms of older lenses, some of those may work, like let's say their Max Lens Mod 2.0. Those will actually snap on there, but the only caveat is that older lenses don't allow for the auto detect feature that the new HB series lenses have. Now, other than the new accessories, the camera itself does also get some new upgrades here. So they've added some new slow-mo burst modes with the ability to record 120 frames per second in a full 5.3K resolution for 5 real-time seconds, 360 frames per second in 900p for 15 seconds, and then a whopping 400 frames per second in 720p, again for 15 real-time seconds. So if we do the conversion on each of those, if we're dropping them into a 30p timeline, that means that you can get up to 20 seconds of slow-mo at 5.3K, 180 seconds or 3 minutes at 900p, and then 200 seconds at 720p. But when it comes to the actual quality of the footage, the 5.3K 120 frames per second footage is crazy good. It's as crispy as ever, and it looks awesome being slowed down by 4 times on this 30p timeline. The 900p footage, though, certainly does take a hit at image quality, of course, at least when it's upscaled on a 4K timeline. The slow-mo is definitely incredible, but it's just going to degrade, of course, being upscaled this much. And then the same thing goes for the 400 frames per second footage in 720p. Slow motion looks incredible when it's native, but just gets fuzzier when it's upscaled to 4K. And another thing to note about these new burst modes, though, is that the field of view also does change with each one, where you can shoot in wide with 5.3K at 120 frames per second. It's linear in 360 frames per second, and then it's narrow at 400 frames per second. So that's certainly going to be a limitation with the kind of shots that you can actually get with these bursts. So when it comes to the usefulness of these new slow-mo burst modes, the 5.3K is definitely the way to go if you only have to record for 5 real-time seconds. But again, that translates up to 20 seconds when it's slowed down. And of course, you can also use a timer or schedule it so it doesn't capture immediately. So it's not necessarily just 5 seconds from the time that you depress the shutter. I don't necessarily think that the 900p or 720p footage is going to be suitable for YouTube or anything like that, at least when it's like viewed on a desktop or a TV, but those look totally fine on a mobile device. So for social, the 900 and 720p modes totally work. I think those modes are really going to be reserved for really specific situations where you need the slowest action possible. And while I do like the 5.3K 120 frames per second burst, that can be limiting with the 5-second recording limit. So I think maybe the most flexible option may actually be that 2.7K 240 frames per second mode, where they actually claim that you can record for like 30 minutes or more, and it's more about the heat buildup more than the processor. Oh, and then for some other little upgrades with the 13 Blacks is that they've also added the ability to create custom preset names directly in the camera, so you have just more custom names to choose from beyond their just Air, Bike, or Epic presets. And then they've also upgraded it with Wi-Fi 6, so transfers are definitely a lot faster now, and I definitely noticed this when I was uploading footage. So the nice thing about the Hero 13 Blacks is that it's coming in at the same $399 price as the Hero 12 when it first came out, at least for the camera itself. But the Hero 13 I think is more about these new accessories which extend the functionality pretty significantly. And while all these accessories are definitely awesome, the price can also stack up quickly depending on which mods and accessories that you want. Like for me, it would be the macro lens, the ultra wide lens, the ND filters, a couple additional magnetic latches, a magnetic latch ball joint mount, as well as a couple spare batteries. And that comes out to over $800. Not a small amount of money. Is it worth it? Well, I don't necessarily think there's many other options when it comes to having this level of versatility with all these purpose-built accessories. Again, I'm a grab and go kind of guy who wants good image quality, but more importantly, I just need something easy that I don't have to think about, and the Hero 13 definitely is easy to use. It is kind of a bummer that some of the new accessories aren't backwards compatible, but again, that's really what the Hero 13 is mainly about, are these new accessories. But what is kind of nice is that you still can use many older accessories with the 13. Anyhow, what are your thoughts on the new Hero 13, especially if you're coming from a Hero 12 or a previous generation GoPro? Worth the upgrade for you? Definitely let us all know what you think down in the comments section down below. And if you found the information in this video useful, do me a favor and just quickly hit that like button, and also subscribe to the channel for plenty more sports tech videos that are coming soon. In the meantime, go have fun out there, and we will see you in the next video.